Thanks, folks, for joining us today. And thanks, Allyssa, for joining today to talk to us because, Oakland Rising, ACLU, and other organizations like Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice and Ella Baker Center, Urban Peace Movement are all on the Alameda County DA accountability table. Alameda County DA accountability table. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you got it right. It's a mouthful.
Something like that, right? And we all, and we've been working on organizing together to put on this mental health town hall. And we have families who've been impacted by the system who are going to be speaking, as well as you're going to be one of the speakers on the panel too. And so I appreciate you joining us today to talk about all of that, because I think it's like watching all this stuff on the news around recall the DA and the DA is doing all of this and all of that. I think we want to really dispel some of the myths and some of the straight out lies I think that are out there around mental health and what the district attorney actually does in relation to mental health and what they can do around it that we want to talk about today. So appreciate you coming on board to talk with me. But let's talk a little bit about this mental health, situation. I think, it's so wild because I feel like, this was an issue prior to the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has really pushed forward to the forefront our ideas about what mental health is, given all of our mental health were, sort of on the brink, right? And I think there has been a ton of funding that has been taken away from public services, particularly in Alameda County. This board of supervisors that we currently have has done a lot to take away money from mental health services and county services for health, and propping up projects here or there. But really, I think the burgeoning problem that we're seeing is around mental health and what does mental health services look like. And what we've done in the past is really just been there are problems, so let's just lock them up, right? Let's find ways to make them, dehumanize them first. That's one of the biggest ways that we do it, right? And then the next is to just lock them up, to find ways that we can charge them with things and get them locked up and then push them into the jails. And so, our sheriff has been infamous, our previous sheriff and our current sheriff too, has been infamous for saying, well, we have so many more mental health cases here in Alameda County, so we need more money to take care of that situation. And jails are not the place to treat mental health, right? And it's been pretty egregious, right?
Yes, you already said a lot, but like you said, crisis of just funding, of priorities, of how we're even offering services, and a majority of it is now in the carceral system. That has caused a huge problem here in Alameda County, especially, that should be a signal to other counties of why there needs to be real investments in public health and mental health services that are outside of the carceral space.
Yeah, let's break it down a little bit, because I know that the ACLU does a lot in terms of, and the work that you do, but also, our partners at the DA accountability table are also doing a lot of direct service work. I think, Oakland Rising doesn't necessarily do that because we do build political power for folks in the flatlands of Oakland and throughout Alameda County. But what we're talking about is really how is this playing out in Alameda County? I think people really need to understand what that means, because there are legislation that has been put in place that actually the DA has to follow. It's the law, right? And so I think when there was that town hall up in D4 with the NCPC up there, right? There was a lot of you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And, I think DA Price was really clear about, actually, this is what I do. This is my job. And I think a lot of people are not wanting to hear that from her, And so I think it's on us to really also share with folks, like, what does the DA really do and what is she beholden to? Because there are laws in place, not just policies, but laws in place that we voted on.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could like just bring that up, you know, get people up to speed on what some of those are.
Absolutely. DAs are elected in our counties in California. They're, you know, a fixture of state law that kind of describes what their general duties and responsibilities are, how they're elected. And DAs are, you know, essentially in charge of prosecuting criminal cases in a specific area of civil cases. They're supposed to administer justice in those cases, also help with things like rehabilitation, reentry, and partnership with other agencies, usually at the county level, that also handle those in terms of, you know, probation or health, or even the jails and the sheriff. These are all mostly county level officials and dollars that we're talking about in the system. The county itself, the county and the board of supervisors, are responsible for the health and welfare of our public and our populations. So they get a lot of that health money. They also get to decide things like budgets for the DA's office versus a public defender or a sheriff. California voters, you know, several years ago, before our current DA was elected and inaugurated this year, have passed many laws that are about reducing mass incarceration. California as a state is the #1 incarcerator in the world. We also spend more money on incarcerating people than we do on things like education, on public health, on other types of resources that people need every day to survive. And so our voters and even our courts had mandated that we now reduce our prison populations, our jails populations. Some of that reduction has happened through lessening people's sentences. People were thrown away for decades for small offenses, for things like 3 strikes of once you've just committed a certain number of offenses, then we're going to throw you away and lock away. We're going to lock you away and throw away the key. And so we've tried to now undo those things policy-wise. And there's still been a lot of barriers with district attorneys actually following those laws,
right,
really understanding the purpose. The purpose, again, is to not rely on carceral solutions for all of our problems in society. It is not to lock away our children and to try to divert people who have mental illnesses, people who are elders, people who are not real risk to societies, but need other types of services and interventions, not to sit in a jail cell. And so things like Prop 47 that passed were again about reducing some of the high sentencing, some of the long prison sentences, reducing our prison populations overall, allowing people to return home, right? To return to work, to return to their families, to return to their healing, to become part of society again, instead of us spending all of those dollars, our tax dollars, our public dollars, on just housing them in cages, right? Where a lot of people are not getting necessary treatment and may even have conditions that worsen when they're inside of jails and prisons. And so these legal changes happened, again, over the last several years. Even before DA Price was put into office, we had things like the Crises Act, which were about the state invest in alternatives to police response when folks are in crisis. Understanding that, again, more and more people are having mental health challenges, are having crises where they need a response, and the only people they're able to call is 911. And the state understands that that is not an effective response, that's not a necessary response to every type of crisis that people are having. And so the Crisis Act is Assembly Bill 2054, and that was passed in 2020, right, 3 years ago. And that establishes a mandate that the state fund alternative police response to folks who are in mental health crises, domestic violence crises, homelessness, other types of issues that, again, are not necessarily criminal, but that are social problems, and people need a social response, a health response, a support response, not a jail or a prison response.
I think that's such a critical line you just said, right? That mental health is not a crime. And I think like that for folks is just, you know, a major response by society is, you know, like I was saying earlier, is to just be like, oh, they're crazy or they're violent. And so rather than thinking about like, what do we need, one, to like create a society where we're caring for each other, but that society as a whole has created this situation, right? Like the current system has created a system where mental health kind of flourishes, you know, drug use and all of these things are flourishing, right? Like this is a societal issue. And I think you hit that so on the nail. And that, you know, our way to answer it is by criminalizing folks, right? That's not our answer, like not you and I or any folks at the DA accountability table. And I would even go so far to say that most Californians who voted for these type of decarceration laws don't want it either. They understand that majority of Californians, the majority of folks in Alameda County, because they overwhelmingly in Alameda County voted in favor of these types of laws, right?
Absolutely.
They support them fully, knowing that, you know, that this is not the solution. Locking people up is not the solution. That what we ultimately all want is so that we can all live healthy and free and right and thrive.
Exactly. We want thriving, healthy communities, right? And that's not going to happen if everyone's behind bars. Everyone. Even before, you know, to 2020 and some of the more recent legislation back in 2004, California voters passed the Mental Health Services Act, which made them tax us more so that money would go into these county programs. And so the counties have to report back to the state what they're doing, who they're serving, what are the demographics, what types of interventions they're offering. And again, this is something that California voters have been supporting, have consistently voted for, to invest in alternatives, to invest in health, to help refund these other types of services that are not about punishment, that are not about policing, that are not about incarceration.
And I mean, this is one of the things that blew my mind, right? Is that I can't remember the year, remind me of the year, but essentially the top federal like incarcerator of the country, the Department of Justice in the United States, did a report on Alameda County and said that Alameda County has been insufficient in their mental health response, right? And that
further than that, they said our county psychiatric hospital
causing more,
and our jails is violating people's constitutional rights, is violating federal civil rights, including the Americans with Disabilities Act. So not just that they're inadequate, but that they're actively violating people's rights that are inside of their psychiatric hospitals and inside of our county jails. This was just released in 2021. And guess what? There was litigation that followed up, and we just settled that and are now looking at years of a federal consent decree about mental health inside the jails, because people are being abused, their rights are being abused. They have a constitutional right to mental health services, even if you are in prison, and it's been clear that we've not been providing that. And so there's lack of effective provision of services, but there's also no reason to keep a revolving door of placing people inside of these county facilities that have inadequate care, because again, there are no real alternatives that our county has invested in. And that's why it's so important that people come to our town hall to learn about our community-based alternatives.
Exactly, right there.
Trying to fill the gap. So the gap is clear, right? It's documented by the U.S. Department of Justice, by our federal courts, and now the settlement agreement where the county has agreed they have to take many steps over the next few years to fix and remedy this problem.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Because then it's like the sheriff will say, like, let's just pour more money into the jail, into Santa Rita, so that they can respond better to it. But they are part of the bigger problem, and I think this sits at the feet of the Board of Supervisors, who continually want to fund incarceration instead of thinking about what it's going to take for us to actually provide adequate mental health services. And I think that is that to me is like, why do we keep investing our money in these systems that aren't working?
Yeah, it's like,
the solution me.
There's no mental health in the jails. Let's just give the sheriff and police more money to give mental health. Again, we're talking about health interventions, health professionals, people who understand this from a health lens, not from a carceral lens.
Yeah.
And again, it violates people's rights just by putting them into the criminal system when all they have is mental illness or disabilities. It violates our federal laws and our Constitution to institutionalize people solely because they are dealing with mental health or mental illnesses.
Right. And I think so let's just like, I don't have to unpack the whole thing, right? But like, no, I don't think we can make it make sense, y'all. But like, like for example, I mean, part of what came out of their report was that folks with mental health, they were being provided mental health services. They were being locked up for 23 of the 24 hours a day, right? And told they were a danger to the rest of the prison population or the jail population. So they would keep them locked up, and then they would get only 15 minutes to see a psychiatrist to get meds and not actually talk to anybody. So if anybody, I used to do mental health services. Before I came to Oakland Rising, my work was in mental health and working in the community, direct service, and doing case management, doing drug and alcohol treatment, working with families from domestic violence, victims and survivors. And like the thing that you constantly are talking about to young people, to folks dealing with mental health, as somebody who provided therapy, who got therapy myself, one of the key tenets is don't be alone. Go find somebody to talk to, build your community, build relationships with your family. We do family therapy. We bring all of these people in, and then we're telling these people at their most critical crisis moment, you need to actually be alone. And absolutely, the only solution is, let me give you some meds and lock you up even longer. Like, there's no way to make sense of that, y'all.
Not only are they not getting like the services and adequate treatment, but again, the conditions of confinement, of continuing to institutionalize them, again, around folks who do not have healthcare training or are focused on that lens, can exacerbate people's conditions, right? Can harm people more, can then put people back out into our communities and streets who are even more sick, who need even more help and intervention. So again, that's a waste of our time, our public dollars, to be putting people into a system where they're not getting the help, but can come out even more harmed and need more resources from the very county that is doing that to them.
That's right. That's right. And so the thing that you also mentioned, right, is like there's these diversion programs that have an opportunity to, like, instead of sending folks into the carceral system, right? And then there's also the community response. And I think there are so many amazing community responses, like Urban Peace Movement, Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, Courage. They're putting these programs together. I mean, Anti-Police Terror Project, their wellness house in West Oakland, and forgive me for forgetting the actual name of the place, but they're providing that kind of services that I think is well underfunded, but so effective.
And that's part of what the Crises Act was getting at. Was we know that there's gaps. We know that community and orgs are trying to fill them. Let's help them. Let's pass legislation to enable it. Let's have state funding to fund some of these community-based programs. And again, in the findings of the Crises Act, it said that many of these populations that deal with mental illness, that may have immigration status consequences, dealing with domestic violence, dealing with trauma and racism, are less likely to trust law enforcement or emergency responders, but are more likely to trust their community, to trust their neighbors, to trust the nonprofit that's been serving them, to trust the youth that they go to school with and that already know them and their families, right? That are going to approach them like human beings, that are going to try to find solutions instead of throw them in a cage. And so we want to then support people who have that trust, who can make those interventions to, again, keep people in our community, to keep people in their homes with their families, to try to put them on a path towards improvement, not put them in a place like our county jails where their mental health can deteriorate further.
Yeah, I mean, it's so amazing because I hear like folks, all the critics, right, are always like, no, that's not effective. It's like you don't have a large enough impact. And it wiles me because I'm like, we gave, not we, the Board of Supervisors in Alameda County voted to give 150 million additional dollars to Santa Rita Jail, to the Sheriff's Department at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Imagine what $150 million would do for the organizations that are doing that direct service work. Like what we would do with $150 million.
Ooh,
We definitely wouldn't have a
get a
report
lot.
from the DOJ telling us how we failed.
Exactly. I mean, it's clear already that our current system that our county is pursuing is failing, right? Failing to the point where our federal government has to put them in check. They've already spent at least $2 million on those attorney's fees for the litigation alone. And settling this consent decree, they're going to have to spend even more to comply with it. Again, this is our tax dollars. These are our public service dollars that could be funding other things, that could be funding, again, a menu, because one solution is not working. It's clearly is documented, right? There's plenty of data about how much millions we're wasting to not see any real results that are improving public safety, that are improving public health, that are actually harming it or just keeping it the same. And so I know people fear change, but it's clear what we're doing now is not working.
That's right.
And so we have to be willing to try new things, to invest in new things. Again, we're not ever going to just close jails and completely get rid of those. We're asking for more resources and people to be diverted to other alternatives, to other programs. And some of that is actually already happening a little bit at the government level, and the DA does play a big role in who gets diverted out of the criminal system if they're wrongly transferred into there.
Yeah, and I love everything you said, and I just want to challenge everybody also that these are actually not new things that community is doing. We've been doing this shit for I don't know how long, decades, right? Like the idea around even alcohol and drug treatment, you know, with the fentanyl and methamphetamine like crisis happening not only in Oakland but across this country, right? Like that were spurred by corporations, just FYI, you know, like that this is that those resources or those programs, that drug and alcohol treatment came from community. It didn't actually come down through the system. It was built up from the communities. And so like a lot of it was really grassroots led. All of the programs that we're talking about that we mentioned, and we are not even mentioning the other organizations that are doing work as well. But that those are not new. They are tried and true projects and programs that have been effective. Can you talk a little bit about what diversion really means? Because like I think people don't understand like what it means to, one, stand in front of a judge and have a district attorney. We've had folks come on to Monday Meals and talk about how the district attorney made choices about what they were being charged with, and what opportunity the DA actually has to, what does diversion mean? You know, like I think, what does it like mean? And then what does it practically look like when somebody is in court, right? And standing before a judge with the district attorney ready to press charges.
Absolutely. So we talked a bit about kind of alternatives to police and law enforcement response. But if they do respond, right, people will end up in jail. They'll end up with charges that then go to the DA, who gets to decide whether and at what level to prosecute. The DA then has that power to flag people for diversion to other programs that are available with the county or even in partnership with community-based orgs. We also have something called collaborative courts in Alameda County that have been around since the 90s, and behavioral health courts. And those are collaboration between our judicial system, our district attorney's office, our defense counsel, public defender's office, as well as, you know, our Alameda County behavioral health system, which is supposed to be housing all of those health programs that the county gets money from the state for. And they get to decide, again, is this person appropriate to put into a cage, or can we offer other treatments that are about health? what is the appropriate program? And then they collectively work to monitor, to get reporting and updates to make sure that people complete whatever treatments, or if they need housing because it's a homeless issue, they'll find them housing. And so the court itself, judges are like, hey, we don't want to be locking folks up. We don't want to go through criminal cases if folks are not committing crimes, but simply have mental illness or addictions, right? Substance abuse. There's even drug courts. And so the DA has a lot of power to, again, flag those cases, to divert them into these other types of courts that already exist at our county level, but also to divert them into actual treatment-based programs, to drop charges in lieu of them completing certain programs, to, again, suspend sentences as long as people complete certain steps or programs. There's a lot of resources that people need, even with reentry, if they have been convicted and incarcerated, but still have mental health or addiction issues when they're returning. DAs, public defenders, probation, which is our county level office, are all responsible for helping to work together, to use their resources, their expertise, to, again, use discretion as well. Do we need to spend all of our money? Do we need to spend this person's time? Do we need to waste the court's time? Do we need to impanel a jury to lock somebody up who may just need a bed, who may just need substance abuse counseling, who may need domestic violence counseling or trauma-informed care? And so we have those different court systems. And I will say that our DA transition team released a 75-day report 75 days into her taking office, and they identified that she found at least 26 beds that are available in our county for mentally incompetent people. She identified 37 folks that were deemed incompetent, mentally incompetent to stand for trial, meaning they do not have the mental faculties to even go through a prosecution, right? So again, it's not worth the DA's time, the money, and that's money that our county, our public is funding. And so diversion is about alternatives to prosecution, alternatives to incarceration. And there is an actual system of courts that are handling drug cases, substance abuse cases, mental illness, and psychosis cases. A lot of these are misdemeanors. A lot of these, again, are people with emotional, psychological disabilities or disorders. And being able to identify that early, before you are putting people away, before you are marking them as criminals, and before you're wasting all of our county resources and time and the public's time and resources, is really important part of the DA's job, as well as some of the other county actors that I named.
Yeah, and I think that's so critical, right? Because this is such an important piece that I think everybody forgets, right? Is that this isn't like there's a district attorney and then it just hops over to a jail system. There's actually an entire system that our previous district attorney and the one before that, and that the state and the county has created for these programs. And so making use of them is such an important piece to that program, to the system itself, like not to like completely legitimize our, the whole carceral system of the justice system, right? But it's interesting how not everybody knows, one, and I think that's by design, right? Because if folks really don't know what's happening or how it's being used or what's really happening, then they can completely remove themselves or, by de facto just be like, let's just lock them up, and go in that direction. But it's like by having that people knowing that actually the DA is just making use of the programs that the court system already has.
Absolutely. And our DA is prioritizing, again, not wasting resources, not over criminalizing folks, which is, something that she inherited in this office, but she is increased staffing to these specific type of courts, that she is trying to work better with all of the collaborations that exist to let people know that these are available and to use this option when appropriate and more often. She also has established a mental health commission to help advise her on these issues. Again, DAs are attorneys. They focus on criminal law and prosecution. their staff are not always experts in health or mental health. And so I think it's important that she has stepped out to create a commission to help advise her of people who are directly affected by these issues, of mental health experts, people who have, again, been providing alternatives and diversion for a long time. And so I wish more of our law enforcement, our supervisors, would, again, rely on health experts, on officials, on not just criminal system, on just criminal experts on how to treat this. Because if we're identifying these problems as health issues, then they need to be resolved through health interventions.
I mean, because a sheriff, a police officer, doesn't know anything about mental health, right? They may get like 8 hours of training, whereas a mental health worker, I had to go through years of school and internships. I had to get 3,000 hours of supervision in order to even be considered for a license.
Yeah.
So I think like that's important, right? And I ended up not even being able to get as far as to getting a license because the entire system crashed with the 2008 economy, right? And the state had spent so much money on incarceration that there was no money in social services in order to just review my damn application. So like, how can we expect mental health workers who are trained over many, many years, y'all? It's not like I just like wake up one morning and decide, oh, I just want to help some folks. It's like you have to go through a lot of work and training and ongoing training in order to stay there. So I think, and I believe that other folks here believe too, that the sheriff, the jail system, the police officers are not equipped to respond to mental health crisis. They are not. I don't know how many times I grew up in a home that was very violent, right? And me and my brother stopped calling the cops because their response at our house was horrid, right? It was horrible. They just told my dad to go take a walk.
Yeah.
Like, for real? Like, so
Yeah.
I think this is not,
right.
8-hour training is not a response, right? And I think we have to be thinking about in really more holistic approaches. There's so many like healing justice opportunities here. If we poured the same amount of money that we're pouring into the jail system, what we could actually be doing in our communities, like I can't even begin to fathom how much more healthier our communities would be.
Absolutely. And I have to say that, again, police are licensed to police, to be peace officers. DAs are licensed to practice law and administer law in courts of justice. But there are licensed health professionals, mental health counselors, behavioral health specialists, a whole range of folks that are licensed, that have gone through education, training, right? And it's not police. They cannot be everything. They're not school counselors. They're not all of these positions that we're trying to just lump up into the criminal legal system. I'll say that over the last decade, we've seen an increase in police violence, abuse, and even death against folks that were experiencing mental health or who had disabilities.
That's right.
Where police, oh, they didn't comply, maybe because they're deaf and cannot hear you. Oh, they didn't comply because they're autistic and they do not communicate that way, and you are actually exacerbating their condition or escalating in a different way. Right. And so again, police have already shown that they are inflicting harm against some of these really
they're incompetent around it.
Right? They are incompetent. They don't identify that these are issues instead of treating people like criminals. And I just want to share the case of Angelo Quinto. He's my friend who I went to high school with, who I organized with on social justice. He then went into military service and came out of vet, but he had PTSD. He was living with his family in Contra Costa, and he was having a PTSD episode that was scaring the family a bit. And so guess what? They called law enforcement. They didn't know who else to call. It's not another popular number that people have at the top of their heads when they feel they're in crisis. Law enforcement came to their home, put him into positional asphyxia to the point that he passed out and never woke up. He stopped breathing, was pronounced dead. This was the day before Christmas several years ago. Died and was killed in front of his family. And his family who had called law enforcement to their house to respond to a mental health crisis, who knew that he was dealing with PTSD as a veteran, right? And so this is just one of many examples, right, of police failing to do their jobs to protect people's safety, to intervene and to not exacerbate, and them just being the wrong response. And I invite y'all to check out the Justice for Angelo Quinto Coalition. Their family does so much work to share his story and to advocate for changes in policy at the state and local level because of what happened to their son.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many, right? Like, I can't even, like, I mean, finally the district attorney last year charged, and they went to court. It's still getting pushed, right? Around the wrongful death suit at the Walmart for Stephen Taylor being murdered by the Alameda County sheriffs in San Leandro Walmart, right? I think there's just so many. Like, we could just keep going and going and going and going on that. And just so that folks know too, and justice for Augie, justice for Angelo, justice for Stephen Taylor, and just goes on. And I'm getting chills just thinking about like their families and
Allyssa,
yeah,
said he was standing outside of someone's home, so they called the police. Like, again, I need people to think about who they're calling, why they're calling, and to know that there are community-based alternatives that you can call on.
Many.
Come to our town hall Thursday to learn about them, how to contact when they're open, and what types of services they can provide to you all, so that you don't feel like you're left to only call on police if that is not the appropriate response.
Reminder, justice for Mario, justice for Eric Salgado. Like, and I think we talked about this before. We had Amanda Blanco and Cynthia Nunes on talking about those cases and the DA opening. And I think, like, I don't want this to be just like Pam Price is our own solution. It's the only solution, because it's not. Like, I want to be really clear about that, because we still have corporations. I want to see the DA charge us the steel, what is it? Sitzer Steel in West Oakland for polluting our town, right? Like I want them charging these police officers. We want real like, you know, the biggest criminals in Oakland or in the Bay are corporations and businesses that are, you know, doing wage theft and things like that. And the environmental injustices that are continuing happening to our communities, like over and over, so many things, right? And so she is not the silver bullet to our system. But what she can do is do what she said in her campaign, which is, I am ready and willing to push for more diversion programs, push for more mental health services, to access and fund the parts of her office that's able to do that work. I think that is critical and key. And we are also asking, we are demanding that the district attorney do more to charge police officers for these egregious acts of death, the egregious acts of violence in our communities, right? Like, you know, some of our strongest gangs in the Bay and in Oakland are our police officers. Like, right? And so we
now have a process to decertify peace officers for many bases of misconduct, including being in law enforcement gangs.
Exactly. So getting back to what you were saying, Allyssa, that this Thursday, the Alameda County District Attorney DA accountability table, mouthful, tired, that, you know, we're having a town hall on Thursday night from 5 to 7 at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center. There is a parking lot there. There's transportation. Just look it up. You're going to see posts on Oakland Rising. You're going to see it on the Alameda County DA accountability table, IG, as well as all of their social media. So I'm going to pin this one, y'all. Somebody just put it there. I'm going to put it at the top. so that you all can come out and hear about what does it mean. We're going to have Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese language interpretation. So please come out and like, just again, I'm sure Alyssa is going to come with this amazing amount of knowledge, as well as the other experts that are coming to share.
Yeah, I'm gonna be your MC for the night, so I'm gonna be, highlighting and hearing from a lot of our other panelists, who include other attorneys, health experts, people who are directly impacted by being incarcerated or serving families, and folks that are running these community-based alternatives to crisis response in Oakland and throughout Alameda County.
Yeah, so come through. You can go to our link tree, go to oaklandrising.org and find out more information. Go to the Alameda County DA accountability table. So come through. It's going to be really great. And we're going to, you can, I think we have food, there's interpretation, there's parking, there's public transportation. Please come through. We have 80 plus people registered. That's amazing. Yeah. Come through, you all, because I think we need to be putting out there this alternative, not standing out here creating more fear and really creating a situation that is causing more harm to our communities. And good drinks, we see in the chat. There's gonna be good drinks too, you all. So I believe non-alcoholic, but good drinks nonetheless. So come through. And we'll have some healers available to do some body work on you and things like that. So come through, you all. Appreciate you, Alyssa, for taking the time. This was such a good conversation. I really appreciate like the work that you do and the knowledge that you really brought to today. We're gonna there's gonna be so many things we're gonna be able to grab from this and continue to share with our community. So thank you so much. Please go to oaklandrising.org/donate to donate if you believe in the work that we're doing here at Oakland Rising. Support the Alameda County DA accountability table because, we are at that space where the alternative voice out there and the work that we're really doing is really important for folks to understand because all we're hearing is about the fear. All we're hearing about is, the attacks on the district attorney. We're only hearing a lot of lies, a lot of myths. So please come through.
Yes.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Bye. Thank you.
ACLU as well.
Yes. Follow ACLU and everybody that is on the accountability table. Bye.